kids, I need you to reach into that plastic bag, and I want you to take something out of there, okay? It's this guy right here. So, kids, I want you to get this, all right? Reach in there. So my staff thought it would be hysterical if every time I said the word happy in a sermon about happiness, that you all would hold this up, right? Or maybe do this with it. And that's awesome. You can do that if you want. But you know what I think would be even funner? Is if every time I said happy, you turned to your parent or the adult closest to you and held that up to your mouth. Like I think that would be just as funny. But you can do it however you want. I want to start today with a quiz. I'm going to show you the pictures of two different people, and I want you to tell me which person is happier. Okay, so there are a couple of pictures. So here's the first person. This is 53-year-old Mavis Wensick of Chicopee, Massachusetts. For the past 32 years, she has worked at the Mercy Medical Center, been struggling to save up enough money to put money down on a new house and to pay off her Nissan Maxima. Well, her luck changed a couple years ago on August 27th when a friend reminded her, hey, why don't you check your Powerball ticket? So she reached into her purse and she discovered that she had won $758,700,000. Now, everybody advised her, as they always do, now keep your life as normal as possible. They advised her to keep her job, not make any sudden decisions. She's like, yeah, right, no. So she told reporters that she immediately said, and I quote, I'm not coming back. She called her employer. So that's Mavis Wensick. The second person, this is Rochelle Friedman and her fiance, Chris. She and Chris fell in love in college, where they eventually were engaged. He proposed to her. Now, in 2010, all of her friends came together. They threw a bachelorette party for her 2 weeks before her wedding. After her and her girlfriends went out to eat, they went back to a friend's house to relax by the pool. And while they were just kind of joking around, one of her closest friends did something that happens all the time at pool parties. She pushed her into the pool. Only this time, she landed the wrong way, and she lay there motionless, face down in the pool. Her friends pulled her out, called the ambulance, and she was rushed to the hospital where they discovered she had injured her spinal cord. And so now she is a paraplegic. She no longer has use of her legs. Now, the good news is that after rehabilitation, she and Chris, they went on to get married. She has no hard feelings whatsoever toward the friend who pushed her. They were joking around, and they're still great friends to this day. In fact, her and Chris have a little girl together, amazingly enough, and that is awesome. But now here's the quiz. So actually two questions. The first one, who would you, like if you could switch places, who would you rather be? Mavis Wensick or Rochelle Friedman? Now, just so you'll know, Mavis, the lottery winner, isn't one of those typical Powerball winners that you hear about, how they won millions of dollars and their life spiraled hopelessly out of control because they just went crazy with it. She's actually doing fine, responsibly managing her money and living, by all accounts, a good life. So given those things, who would you rather be? Say, Chris, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard in my life, right? We all would rather be the Powerball winner. So here's the second question, however. Who do you think 1 year later is happier? Powerball lottery winners or people who have a horrible accident and are paraplegics? Well, you probably know where this is going. I don't know how they ever decided to do this, but psychologist Dan Gilbert and other researchers at Harvard University interviewed people 1 year after hitting the lottery and 1 year after becoming a paraplegic. And this is what they discovered. Exactly 1 year after hitting the lottery, 1 year after becoming a paraplegic, their happiness levels were exactly the same. We're finishing again the series, The Happiness Challenge. And in the first week, we talked about how sometimes people... That was a great idea, wasn't it? I'm not going to be able to get through the sermon. Hope you guys aren't hungry for lunch. So we talked the first week about how people said, well, they are happy, but they really weren't. What they're doing is trying to just manufacture these. Where's Kathy? Get her back in here. No, I think it was Gwen's idea originally. All right, so that we just try to manufacture these moments of incredible joy. But we're not really feeling the joy. But we just want to get that dopamine hit, and we just go through our lives trying to manufacture one awesome, incredible experience after another. And and so the last couple of weeks we talked about how if you want to be genuinely happy, the researchers show that you've got to do a couple things. You've got to be able to believe hard things. And that is to believe, to face the reality maybe of your life. And then based on that, you have to do hard things. That we cannot be genuinely happy when there are things in our lives that we refuse to acknowledge and there's stuff that we refuse to do. And interestingly, and people can know the difference. If you put two people side by side, one person genuinely joyful, genuinely happy, and another person trying to just manufacture this, you can tell them because they stick out like a sore thumb. I came across this video. I want to show this to you. It's a video of another church's worship service, and they, at this church, evidently had their children come in and sing. And I want you to look very closely when this plays and see if you can figure out exactly who is genuinely happy and who isn't. Like who's just trying to manufacture it. There are a lot of kids in the video, so it's going to be kind of difficult to tell which is which, but I want you to watch it and see if you can pick out the genuinely happy kid in this video.
There's revival in the spreading like a wildfire in my heart. Sunday morning,
just wait, it gets better.
And it's lasting all week long. Can you hear it? Can you feel it? It's the real gospel song. Oh, won't you choose it? You can do it. There ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. I got an old church choir singing in my soul. I got a sweet salvation and it's beautiful. I got a heart overflowing 'cause I've been restored. There ain't nothing gonna steal my joy. No, there ain't nothing gonna steal my joy.
I know it was hard, but were you able to spot the kid that was really, really feeling it? I love that she was doing the robot and all this arm stuff. I love the line. I love the line they sang. There ain't nothing going to steal my joy except singing in front of a bunch of people on television in front of our church, right? That'll steal my joy. But it's a perfect visual of unhappy people that sometimes will do cool stuff to kind of bring ourselves relief in the short term. But when whatever it is, those things we're doing, when the newness wears off, when the trip is done, whatever it is, we kind of find ourselves in the same situation. And so we want to, this morning, talk about one more thing, and this is really where all this was leading to. One more important, the most important thing that we've talked about in this entire series. And to do that, I want to turn to the book of James and the first chapter of the book of James. Again, this is Jesus' brother. He was a leader in the Jerusalem church, one of the early, most prominent Christian leaders. People would have looked to him for wisdom. And this is what he says in his little writing, the book of James in the New Testament in the first chapter. And chances are you might have heard this before, but he writes, "Now consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And we must let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing." James is saying that if we can just get God's perspective on this thing of living and happiness and life, we would be doing a lot better. And we'll discover that when we address hard things, two things come out of that experience. He says, first of all, that trials make us mature and they make us complete, not lacking anything. So he's saying that when trials come, find a way to be thankful because you know that you are being matured, that God is in the process of completing you. He's changing you, and these trials are doing that. And so when they come into our lives, even though we might not like them, we need to have that perspective that through this God can do, and probably is if we allow him, doing some amazing things of our life. So I want you to think to yourself, what are some of the Like the worst trials that you faced maybe in the last few years. I can think of a couple that I faced. One of them was actually last February. Maybe you remember it. When the entire football watching world had to endure a Super Bowl listening to commentator Chris Collinsworth profess his man crush for Tom Brady and Bill Belichick all night. I don't know if you remember the Super Bowl last year, but like that, they never stopped talking about how awesome Tom Brady and Bill Belichick were. I mean, it was absolutely annoying. Was I the only one that was annoyed by it? Like, I need to work on that, I guess, because I was like, this is ridiculous. And then, however, it was, as you know, an incredible moment of awesomeness when the Patriots lost. The Patriots lost, and that was an awesome thing. In fact, I don't know if you remember what I said last week. I said that maybe for you an incredible moment of awesomeness would be if the Lions actually won a game. And like I had no idea, but they won and they beat Bill Belichick's man crush team, the Patriots, or Chris Collinsworth, and so that was awesome. And there's another thing that I faced that came to my mind, and this is a little harder to talk about. You know, that one was just kind of silly. This is a little more serious, and the stakes were very, very, very high. But Lori and I, many years ago, we went on a getaway, just the two of us, and we went up north to a cabin. And we had taken some videos up there to watch when we were there, some movies we wanted to catch up on, and she wanted to watch one movie, and I wanted to watch another. Now, neither of us had seen the other movie that the other person wanted to see. And so I wanted to watch one of the greatest movies ever made, the winner of multiple Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Of course, I'm talking about Braveheart, one of the greatest movies of all time ever, right? Help me out. And so I thought, it's Mel Gibson, right? Ladies, wouldn't you want to watch a Mel Gibson? Don't answer that. That's creepy. So I thought, surely she'll want to watch this. But she didn't. She did not want to watch it. We argued. It was not pretty. Finally, she said, okay, I'll watch it on one condition. If you first watch the movie that I want to watch. Now, no disrespect meant to you if you like this movie or the 1,000 other Hallmark Channel movies that are exactly like it. But I did. I agreed to watch the decidedly non-Academy Award-winning movie based on a Nicholas Sparks book called The Notebook. And kids, I want you to take your smiley faces, and I want you to do that, okay? And, look at that. I love that classic Hollywood film. It's been out all of 3 years, and it's already a classic Hollywood film. And then I don't know if you can read that, but below the title it says, The Love Story to End All Love Stories. If only that were true. Like if only that was the love story that ended all the rest of them, right? Well, obviously, that's silly, and we face things and we go through things in life that are much, much more serious than that. The worst of the trials that we can go through cause us to doubt our faith, cause us to doubt ourselves, cause us even to doubt God, even sometimes causing us to doubt even our own lives at times. We don't want these things to come into our life. We don't wish for them. But here, let me ask you a question. And we were talking about this in our Sunday morning class. And somebody said this, that without trials in our lives, we wouldn't be nearly the mature people that God is trying to make us to be. So the question is, even though we hate them, even though they take us to the brink of like despair sometimes, can you imagine what our lives would look like if we had no trials or suffering whatsoever? I want you to look at this block of marble. This is a quarry of Carrara marble. It's from northern Italy, some of the most expensive marble there is. And I show you this because that right there is a block of it. And that right there is exactly what Michelangelo would have seen when he began to chisel out one of the greatest masterpieces of all time, the Pieta. Now, the Pieta is housed in St. Peter's Basilica. It sits behind a big piece of glass because back in 1972, some crazy guy took a hammer and started beating on the Pieta like 100 times before they finally caught him. And they forced him to put it behind glass. But your life without trials is like that block on the left. Like it's just an unformed block. However, with time, the right work, children's struggle, sickness, loss, and yes, even at times people going through horrendous things like becoming a paraplegic, that can be your life on the right. It took Michelangelo just 2 years to carve that amazing thing out of that block. And yet God has been working on you and me our entire lives, allowing circumstances, allowing situations to chisel away at the rough edges of our life. Now, this doesn't just mean that you just smile and put on a happy face and pretend like everything is great, because it's not. It's not. I mean, and God is like, yeah, I know that stinks really bad. But the thing is that once we know this and once we understand this, it can change how we view trials. And I want to tell you, it took me many trials till I even begin to comprehend this, that God does some of the most amazing things in our lives and the lives of others through the bad things that happen to you. And once you know this, it changes how you view trials. A little knowledge is amazing. I think this tattoo says it best, right? Knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power. But when we, poor guy. But when we know this about trials, it can change the way that we should view the hard things of life. So I want to look at that very last phrase in James chapter 1, verse 4, when he writes, "Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Not lacking anything. I think he's saying that the other reason that God allows us to go through these things is to get us to the point where we do not need anything. That for our inner equilibrium, our inner happiness, our joy, we do not need an external anything because we have something deep inside of us. So the first week, I don't know if you recall 3 weeks ago, we talked about this great psychologist, William James, so influential in shaping a lot of things about how we think about things. But he said that the number one thing that people needed in life was happiness, right? And so this is what he said. He said, if we were to ask the question, what is human life's chief concern? One of the answers that we should receive would be, well, it's happiness. How to gain, how to keep, how to recover it. It is, in fact, for most men at all times, the secret motive of all they do and all they are willing to endure. Happiness is life's number one need. It says it right in our Declaration of Independence, doesn't it? That we are guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, the problem is that ultimately what God is going for is to get us to the place where we do not need even that. And it's kind of a paradox. The more we pursue it in this life, the less that we're going to find it. So God allows us to experience trials. He forces us to believe and do hard things, but his ultimate goal is so, as James says, that we may not be lacking in anything. Now, he's not talking here about hitting the lottery. He's not talking about never having to work in your life again. James is talking about not needing anything. And if happiness is the number one need that we all have, it's the number one thing that we all want, we can reach a point in our life where we don't even need to have that. Now, I know that sounds kind of strange, but hang with me. That genuine happiness is no longer needing to be happy. Does that make sense? So several years ago, a lady named Peggy Noonan, she has written books, but at one time she was a speechwriter for President Reagan, I think President Bush as well. But she articulated it so well, and I don't remember if it was in a book or an article I read, but she said that ours, meaning roughly my generation, maybe the one right before it, and certainly the ones after it, my generation, she said, our generation, is the first generation of people in the history of the world who really, truly expected to find happiness in this world. She said prior to that, people had this inner sense that we're just passing through here and that there's something better waiting for us, that even though this world can be pleasant and wonderful at times, that we're never going to find true happiness, the kind that we look for. And she says we're the first generation in the history of the world that truly expected to find that in this lifetime. And man, I think she's so right in that. Now, don't misunderstand me. The Bible is very clear. God wants us to have a blessed life. He wants to live a peaceful life. He wants us to have a good life. But we have totally mangled that definition of a good life biblically. And so it's not that God wants us just to trudge through life in despair the whole time. That is not it at all. But he does want us to understand that the more we pursue this happiness that we think that we all need to have, the farther and farther away from true happiness we're going to get. Guys, those of you that are married, I want to ask you a question. So, guys, when you wanted to become engaged and you wanted to marry your wife, did you first go to her father and ask permission to marry her? I'm going to see a show of hands, guys. Did you ask for permission to marry her? Well, not too many of you. That's a great thing to do. Lori's dad is here somewhere, I think, and Jim, I don't know if you remember the day that I came in and asked for your permission to ask Lori to marry me, and so I hate to tell you this, but true confession that I think you already know. I'd already asked her, right, to marry me. Did you know? You knew that, right? Okay, all right, so. But it's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do. So if you are not yet married, guys, young men, I want to give you an illustration of how not to ask your in-laws for permission to marry your wife, okay? And so I want to tell you about a guy who is named Adoniram Judson. Adoniram Judson, there you go. I practiced that all week. The worst example ever of how to ask a parent for their daughter's hand in marriage. And so, again, his name is Adoniram Judson. There we go. He was an incredibly bright young guy. In 1804, he enrolled in Brown University. 4 years later, he graduated as the class valedictorian. But while he was in college, he befriended a young man by the name of Jacob Eames. And Jacob Eames introduced him to some atheist French philosophers, whereas before Adoniram had always been an ardent Christian. Over time, however, exposure to these atheist philosophers chipped away at Adoniram's Christian conviction and left him a nice, moral, religious person, but he was very ambivalent about Christianity or about God. Sometime after they graduated, both Adoniram and his friend Jacob were traveling. And they stayed at this inn, and they stayed in separate rooms. During the night, Adoniram heard screams coming from somebody in pain. He didn't know who it was, and pretty soon he just kind of fell back asleep. Only in the morning did he discover that it was his friend Jacob who was screaming like that, and he had in fact died during the night. And he had callously ignored his screams. Well, that experience, as you could imagine, had a profound effect on Adoniram. He immediately got rid of his skepticism and his atheism and whatever, and he re-embraced his Christian faith. He went to seminary, and he made a solemn dedication of himself to God, as he put it, to dedicate his entire life to seeking and finding people like his friend Jacob who needed to come to faith in Jesus Christ. Very quickly, he decided to become a missionary to the vast, densely populated, dangerous, unexplored at that time country of India. But during this time, he had fallen in love with a young woman named Mary Ann. And since her parents didn't live close by, Adoniram wrote her father to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. And this is what the letter says: is after a few pleasantries, catching up her father on that he wanted to be a missionary. This was his pitch, all right, to Mary Ann's father. Well, I have now to ask whether you can consent to part with your daughter early next spring to see her no more in this world. Whether you can consent to her departure and her subjection to the hardships and sufferings of missionary life. Whether you can consent to her exposure to the dangers of the ocean, to the fatal influence of the southern climate of India, to every kind of want and distress, every degradation, insult, persecution, and perhaps a violent death. Like this is serious. Like this. So, can you consent to all of this in hope of soon meeting your daughter in the world of glory with the crown of righteousness? Well, when you put it like that, how can you resist, right? So later, Mary Ann wrote the following note to her friend Lydia. After her father said, yes, you can get married, this is what she wrote to her friend. I feel willing and expect, if nothing in providence prevents, to spend my days in this world in heathen lands. Yes, Lydia, I have about come to the determination and to give up all my comforts and enjoyments here, to sacrifice my affection to relatives and friends, to go where God in his providence shall see fit to place me. Well, they went to India, and life in India is about, as you can imagine, how it would have been, especially 2 centuries ago. Mary Ann gave birth at sea. Right before they landed on shore, that baby died. Soon after getting established, they received word that all financial supporters were going to stop sending them money. He began to teach, when they got there, began to teach people about Jesus, Adoniram did. He was thrown for that into prison by the local authorities. He was chained upside down for 2 years and tortured. Mary Ann was allowed to bring him food, but she became just as sick and thin as he was. Eventually, he got out of prison just in time to watch Mary Ann die. Now, I think at that point, probably every one of us, including myself, would be like, okay, I've done my part. I'm out of here. I'm done. Like, let somebody else do this. But Adoniram Judson would not do that. He moved on to another country. It used to be called Burma, modern-day Myanmar. And failing in India only made him more resolved to reach people for Christ. In fact, he said, I will not leave Burma until the cross is planted here forever. He stayed in Burma 35 years. He remarried 2 more times, had 13 children altogether, 7 of which died early deaths. We read that and we're like Adoniram, like if we could talk to him, what a waste. What a waste. How could you do that? Why would you do that? Wouldn't you be happier doing something else more fulfilling with your life that wasn't so much of a struggle? I think if we were to ask him that question, I think he would be genuinely taken aback by it. I think he would have probably said, well, what in the world does happiness have to do with anything? The reason I'm happy is because I no longer need to be happy. Well, before moving to Burma, Adoniram had one simple goal. One simple goal in Burma that he was going to devote his life to, that he wanted to have a church with about 100 people in it. And he did that. But by the time he died, after some 35 years in Burma, Adoniram Judson had started 100 churches. He had translated the Bible into Burmese, which was then used all across the country by other groups. Today, there are over 3,700 churches that trace their beginning back to Adoniram Judson. If you go to Myanmar, up in the highlands, there's a tribe called the Karen tribe. And there they have 180,000 Christians in this tribe. They have 100 Christian schools. They send missionaries all over Southeast Asia. And if you ask them, how in the world did that happen, they'll tell you. They'll tell you it's because of a genuinely happy man who did not need to be happy in this world. His name was Adoniram Judson. And so really, like this whole series has been building to this point. That again, the paradox of happiness is that those who are genuinely happy no longer need to be happy. Does it make sense? It's kind of upside down. But because they face trials that have made them mature and complete, as James says, they lack nothing. And you can get to that point. Any of us can get to that point. And when we do, if we do, we are free. We are a free person. Because this world has no control over us. Becoming like that. Becoming like Jesus. To have happiness just simply because we are saved and because God loves us and because we know that one day we are going to live forever. Those who are genuinely happy no longer need to be happy. And that is the happiness challenge.